Mr. Chairman, thank you all for holding this hearing on this important issue. So the central mission of HUD is to provide safe and sanitary conditions for people receiving housing assistance. And so I think we're all deeply disturbed to see taxpayers' dollars being wasted like this, and disappointing that HUD has failed to provide a witness here today. I think what you'll learn as you look into this deeper is it's in addition to perhaps some negligence on the part of individuals at HUD, and certainly the blame that falls on the hands of these slumlords that own and operate these buildings, we have a process that's broken, and I'll describe that in detail in a moment. I do, again, want to thank our two witnesses that are going to be testifying on the second panel, Ms. Tracy Grant and Major Josh Lewis. Both of them have done much to help Florida and the entire country through their work to make these conditions known. We would not be having these hearings here today, for example, if Ms. Grant had not come forward, and I want to thank them for taking the time to travel here and testify before the committee. I became involved in this situation about a year ago when the tenants of Eureka Gardens took their case to the public. And these tenants bravely made their voices heard, even as they faced the threat of eviction from their landlord, a landlord by the name of Global Ministries Foundation. Since then, residents at Global Ministry Foundation properties and at derelict Section 8 housing properties around the state have also spoken of their troubles. And I want to leave this on the record without any doubt. Global Ministries Foundation are slumlords. They operate these facilities at the bare minimum. They take money from the American taxpayer, and they spend as little as possible on maintenance. And I invite you to look at their financials so you can see how much money they pay themselves and the people that work around them, including many family members of the individual at the head of this organization. When I visited Eureka Garden in Jacksonville, I saw crumbling staircases, exposed electrical wires, boarded up windows that would trap a child inside if there was a fire. I saw an apartment that hadn't been painted in 13 years. I saw pieces of wood with exposed nails put up in place of a door in a unit that had small children living in it. This was evident even after Global Ministries rushed crews to the property to make cosmetic repairs just 48 hours before I arrived. The scene was unreal. As we arrived, they had set up banners, all these work crews around, just to kind of make it look like they were doing things. But in the end, as soon as we left, the crews left, and the work they did was largely cosmetic. I spoke with tenants who had been through a lot over the last few years and heard stories like some of the ones you'll hear today from Ms. Grant, stories of neglect and crime and bureaucratic indifference from HUD. When Senator Nelson and I visited Windsor Cove Apartments in Orlando, another GMF property, as he said, we saw standing water in apartments and damaged roofs, collapsed ceilings, and we breathed air that reeked of mold. We spoke with residents who live there for multiple years now, trapped in a facility whose conditions no one should have to endure. A couple weeks ago, I visited Stony Brook Apartments in Riviera Beach, and this is hard for me to say because the other two places were so bad. What I saw at Stony Brook is even worse. In addition to all the other things we just talked about, as you walk through the courtyard, you will see little nickel bags and dime bags of drugs, consumed drugs, all over the place. More common than any other garbage that might be laying around in the courtyard of that building. And an unwillingness to repair these properties is unfortunately par for the course for Global Ministries. They willfully neglect the well-being of their tenants, as you will hear from Major Lewis testify today. These are the 3 GMF properties I visited in the state of Florida. In each case, I'm sad to say that HUD has enabled fraud and abuse to continue, all while taxpayer money continues to flow into the pockets of these slumlords. Bureaucratic red tape, miscommunication, a lack of urgency have plagued the administrative response. But nothing displays how broken this program is better than HUD's own inspection process. The passing score for a HUD inspection is 60 out of 100. If a property scores above this threshold, HUD gives it the stamp of approval, declaring the conditions are decent, safe, and sanitary. An approval that traps tenants at the property and keeps money flowing to the landlord. What I've discovered in Florida, however, is that HUD has compromised the integrity of these standards. Last year, the inspection at Windsor Cove, which we visited, they gave them a passing score of 90 out of 100. The next inspection, which happened to occur a week after Senator Nelson and I visited the property, gave it a failing score of 48. That inspection found a projected 86 life-threatening deficiencies on the property. From one score to the next, this kind of inconsistency is beyond belief. Eureka Gardens received a score of 80 out of 100 during the summer inspection that occurred just before the tenants came forward. After months of back-and-forth repairs, hospitalizations from gas leaks, alleged lead poisoning, and incessant mold outbreaks, HUD came back with a follow-up inspection and still passed them, but this time 62 out of 100. Can you imagine? 62 out of 100 in the facility that you just saw images of a moment ago. Right after that inspection, in a letter sent to GMF after visiting the property, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multifamily Housing wrote that HUD officials do not believe the property would currently pass another REAC inspection, despite the fact that an inspection had just happened barely a month before. These slumlords caused the problems, but HUD has enabled it. And the twin vices that so often afflict massive federal safety net programs, bureaucracy and corruption, have prevented the kind of action necessary to protect the tenants and allowed this crisis to go on for far too long. So that's why we introduced and passed 3 amendments to the HUD legislation that we considered back in May. And Senator Nelson and I have also introduced legislation that would enact a tenant survey in order to better identify problems in properties like GMF's. The problems at these properties are not limited to the state of Florida. These slumlords, GMF, they own properties in Alabama, Indiana, Louisiana, North Carolina, New York, Georgia, and Tennessee. And similarly bad conditions have led to federal investigations because of those properties. They own over 5,000 taxpayer-funded units across the nation. And beyond GMF, if HUD is falsely certifying the living conditions at these many properties for one organization, then it's probably doing the same for many other entities we have yet to hear about. So I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about the effects of GMF's fraud and HUD's neglect. And I hope we can continue working together across party lines. This is not a partisan issue, to investigate GMF and to pass legislation to fix HUD's faulty inspection process. Thank you.
Few minutes.
Well, I thank you for your indulgence. I thank you all again for being here today. And I think there'll be a broader conversation one day about the structure of the program in general. But right now we want to make the program we have in place work better. One of the things that we've learned in this process, and Ms. Grant, I'm going to ask you about this, is one of the reasons why these tenants don't come forward. And we've heard this now in the 3 properties is there's a level of intimidation and threats of eviction, and in essence, you get hassled. If you start showing up in the newspaper and on camera, we've had tenants say, I don't want to be on camera because, bad things happen to people around here that come forward and complain. Ms. Grant, could you share with us a little bit about some of those impediments that you have faced, and also related to that, so the threats of eviction, the threats that come from the management company about not complaining too much, and also, and I don't know if this has been the reality in Eureka Gardens, we've also heard that from time to time the management company will come in and give preferential treatment to certain tenants in exchange for them being kind of the voice of the tenants, in essence the owner-sponsored tenant association president who supposedly speaks on behalf of tenants. I know that's not the case in Eureka Gardens. We've heard about that in other properties, and therefore they basically self-appoint the person they want to speak on behalf of the tenants, and these people think everything's great, but they're getting the new refrigerator and they're getting preferential treatment. I don't know if you saw any of that in Eureka Gardens beforehand, so if you have, we'd love to hear about it, but in particular, the threats from management to tenants if they complain too much.
Yes, you have, if you speak out or if you were bold enough to just go up there and say, hey, this is my problem, you need to fix it, or I'm going to go to legal aid, or I'm going to go to the news media, then it's like, okay, well, I'll give you a 10-day eviction notice so that you can get off the property, or it's a 10-day eviction notice for non-compliance for whatever reason. It may not be for what they're complaining about. They'll just find something and say, I'm giving you a 10-day notice. We've had residents just say, okay, they don't have a legitimate reason for giving me a 10-day notice. And when they go to legal aid, because one of the manager that was there before, our new manager that's in place right now, she would just say, I know the big guy at legal aid and he's not going to do anything. Later on, we found out that she did not know him and he does not like her. So when that was found out, then everybody went to legal aid, and so she got pissed off, because now she doesn't have any leverage over these people. And the new manager, she doesn't say anything. If you feel like, the issues that you have, then, she'll just say, okay, well, this is what I feel is done, that you haven't complied or whatever, and I'll give you a 10-day notice. Now you can either work on it or, leave the property. But yes.
So basically, there have been instances in multiple cases at Eureka Gardens where if a tenant complained too much, the management company would suddenly come up with a reason to evict you. And that got around. Everybody knew if you complain, you're going to get an eviction notice.
Exactly.
Thank you.